lot of parents are thinking about what their kids are watching on Netflix. Because right now, Netflix and a lot of other places have episodes that are dealing with issues dealing with gender transition, gender identity from a non-biblical perspective. And these issues are targeted to young kids, trying to influence them in the way that they should think. So how should we think about gender identity and what the Bible says about who we are as a man and woman? Well, we're going to listen to Chelette, one of the experts in this area from the Institute of Biblical Sexuality, help us understand what God's design is for biblical sexuality and what the enemy is trying to do to our kids and to our families. Of course, we want everybody to listen to this particular podcast, but this one's for adults because the themes that we're going to be talking about really are a little bit more of a mature theme. But we want you to not only listen, but we want you to like and share and send this to other parents who need to know about this information dealing with gender identity and sexuality from a biblical perspective. Enjoy the conversation and enjoy the journey.
Parents, welcome to The Journey, a podcast to help you be the very best parent you can be. We are thrilled you are here and that we get to do life together. We are here to serve your family, and we're thankful you're joining us on The Journey.
Chelette, I've got to ask you a question. I'm listening to a podcast, right? And I always have you come in and talk about gender and sexuality. Right. This is your area of expertise. So I'm listening to a podcast about WPATH and about gender issues in England, in all of Europe. And the research has come out that the greatest medical malpractice has been perpetrated on this generation of young people. That they have gone through surgeries, they have gone through body transformations. Yeah. They didn't understand the implications of it, and that they really thought a lot of these things were just temporary. And I'm thinking to myself going, it's true, right? It's true. When we start thinking about gender and sexuality, you and I both know that these are God-designed and very permanent parts of the way that God has created us. But the world does not tell young people that. And so how did we get here? How did we get to this particular point that all of a sudden something that's so fundamental, right? Our gender, our sexuality, being male and being female, is literally something that people think that they can change.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think the big picture answer of this is that we have an enemy who is
let's start there.
Who is the devil, who is the great deceiver.
Oh.
And we can't forget that he is the deceiver.
Yeah.
That is very much a part of who he is. And so the idea that we would believe lies and embrace lies is very much a part of his MO. Yeah. And so I think big picture, that's the first starting point.
Yeah.
But it
does seem like it's one of those lies that so you and I are both huge fans of The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self.
Right.
And he starts off the book, right? Like if I walked into my grandparents, right, and they were sitting down and I said, I'm a man trapped in a woman's body, they would think that it's the start of a joke.
Right. Sure. Exactly.
So it seems like one of those lies that, right, you would look at and say,
how could we possibly be at this place?
There's no way we can get to that particular point.
And I think what you see in our culture that's happened, and it's really accelerated, I think, within the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. But what I think has happened over time is we have moved from a communal people to a very individualistic people.
Very much so.
And in the process of that, we have disconnected family, we have disconnected from community, we have disconnected from church, we have disconnected in many ways even from our own cultures. Mm. And as a result of that, you have a huge population of young people that are desperately longing to belong. And when you don't belong in your family, when you don't feel like they get you or they understand you or you're in the same ballpark that they're in, you're looking for a ballpark to play in. And all of a sudden they go online, they find people that have also isolated themselves and are also alone and are also looking for a place of community. And one broken person begins to talk to another broken person, affirming more brokenness. And the next thing you know, they're walking down a path that I think initially they don't anticipate quite what the ending is going to be. But once they begin to walk down the path, the affirmations are so incredibly strong that they feel like, well, I got to keep going, And so I start off with just a declaration of, well, I think maybe I'm a girl trapped in a boy's, body. And then they go, well, yeah, that's probably who you are. You're probably really a girl. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll identify as a girl, and then maybe I'll use pronouns, and maybe I'll let my hair grow, and maybe I'll start cross-dressing. And
okay, so how did we get to the point, though, that everybody else who should be reasonable and intelligent and speak truth to this 6, 12, 14-year-old person now no longer says, hey, you know what, that's not true. We've gotten to the point now where we literally, and you and I both know, like when we say this, it's I still think it's crazy, right? But we have state laws, right? Mm-hmm. We have state laws that when a student walks into that school and they say, hey, my name's now Jenny and my pronouns are, that teacher cannot tell the parent. Yeah. They right? It's not hey, we prefer you not, and this is a safe place. They have laws that mandate that nurse, that teacher cannot tell a parent. Yeah. How did we get here? So the guardians who are our age, Ricky, these are people who are our age, are looking at 6-year-old kids and saying, okay, here's the path that you're on, right? And gender, hormone blockers. Oh, that's fine, right? It won't have any impact on you, right? Top and bottom surgeries, people literally who are cutting off parts of their body. Yep. And then 5 years later realizing that, okay, I made a mistake, but I
so sad, too bad.
Right.
You can't fix it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it makes no sense other than what I started out with, that there is a demonic that's taking place. And again, it's one of those things that I think the church has looked at and laughed and said, well, no, that's not really what's happening. But no, that really is what's happening. Yeah. And especially when you see a systematic and very intentional destruction of the family, which is happening in the very laws you're talking about, where folks are saying, okay, wait a minute, parents, you don't have a right to know what your child is learning at school. You don't have a right to know what your child is professing at school. You don't have a right to know how your child's identifying at school. You just send them to school and send them to us, and we're going to take care of it. Yeah. Well, that is a huge disconnect from when you and I were going to school, where mom and dad were very much involved in everything we did at school. The teachers were calling home on a regular basis. Mom and dad were up at the school on a regular basis. Yeah. Everybody was involved.
Yeah. You thought you got in trouble by the principal?
You just wait till you get home.
You just wait till you get home.
Exactly. And so that kind of stuff is completely gone. And I think part of that is because we have in some ways trained adults to say you're not supposed to be mentors and leaders. You're supposed to be friends to all the kids. And your objective is not to really guide them because, they need to guide themselves and they need to find their own way and they discover who they really are and their authentic self. But instead what we've done is decide to become friends with everyone. Yeah. And you can't really be a friend in the sense of my objective is to make you happy all the time if I'm also trying to lead you. There's going to have to be some friction that takes place, that whole biblical principle of iron sharpening iron. We say that as though it's a friendly experience. It's not. In order to sharpen iron, it's one iron is losing the other, and there's shrapnel involved. And so there's a sense in which there's a friction that has to take place. And most folks today, especially in our cancel culture, are afraid to mention any of those things for fear they will lose their job, they'll lose their livelihoods, they'll be cast out of their communities, and they're afraid to do that. I mean, I've had calls at the office of people that work for large corporations come June, and they're being required to put up LGBTQ paraphernalia at their desk because this is Pride Month. And if you don't do it, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you doing it? You're not being part of the team here. You're not playing along with us. Well, how is that not a almost religious experience, that's taking place? Yet, if we said, okay, come Christmas, we want everyone to celebrate Jesus, and we want everybody to have, Bibles on their desk, we would not be allowed to do such a thing.
I was thinking of when you said where we've changed. It's like my background's in law, and so I always look at what has finally gotten to the point, right, where we've codified it and we've put it in law.
Sure.
Because it takes a while, right? Yeah. Something has to happen to get to the point, right? The law has to catch up to society.
Correct.
Sometimes the law gets ahead of society, and usually that's
not a good thing.
It's never a good thing. But it is interesting because I was thinking of the Casey decision in '92, where we're writing about, are we going to overturn Roe versus Wade, right? And they decided not to. And one of the things that they wrote about is how, this essence of what it means to truly be human is that you have the ability to define your own meaning of existence. And I'm literally reading the words in 1992 for those who are young and right, right. In 1992, I'm reading those words and I'm like, this is a Supreme Court case, right? That's that's telling me that, right, the highest law of the land is basically looking to people saying, what we're telling you you have the ability to do is create your own existence, right? That's why we have to keep abortion legal, because the decisions that you make can't have any consequences that you don't want. Mm-hmm. Right? So if those consequences are an unwanted child, we need you to be able to get away with that. We can't say to you, Ricky, right, so what's the process that you went through to get pregnant, mm-hmm. right? Is there anything we can do over here dealing with gender and sexuality? All of these decisions, to me, all of these decisions like are intertwined and have been going on from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And that's, right, Carl Truman's walking us through even further back than that. Thank you, Carl. But it's that concept where you start getting into now, right, we get to this point where if I get to create my own sexuality and my own preferences, and there can't be any consequences to those particular choices, right? Gender's next, right? I get to create my own gender. You've seen what started out as, I guess, the gender unicorn, which has now become it started out as the gender bread man.
Right. Now it's the gender unicorn.
Now it's the gender unicorn.
Yeah.
Right. But everything's on a sliding scale.
Yep.
Right. So gender's on a sliding scale, sexuality's on a sliding scale, and I can move it back and forth. And that's when people begin to kind of like, that makes sense, because there are times that I feel, mm-hmm. Either more masculine or more feminine or more like a man or more like a woman. So my feelings dictate all of this. And then they take those and they make decisions that aren't feelings anymore. Right. They're facts.
Right. They're laws now.
They're laws now.
And now everybody has to adhere to what your feeling was at a given moment in time.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think when you push where we're going, if you want to know the future of where we're going and how that's happened.
There's more?
There's more. I think what's next is not only will we have just transsexual realities where folks are moving from male to female, but now we're even talking about transhuman realities where we're moving from, are we human or are we going to take on computer-ish aspects of our lives? Do we have AI embedded in our brains and in our personhood somehow, and that's who we are. I heard a woman even today on the radio coming here talking about how she was in love and had married a AI image of a person that's presently, a convicted criminal, and how she hopes he gets out and she hopes everything's going to be okay because she's in love with him, but she's really in love with his AI reality. And I'm like, well, AI isn't a reality. I mean, it's not real. You don't have a real person there. Yeah. But it's happening all the time. I mean, I saw a program again the other day on a person who had a fiance who had gotten incorporated. She was by herself, and so she began to have a relationship with ChatGPT and talk to them like it was her boyfriend, and it began to respond to her as romantically as a boyfriend might. And pretty soon she had this incredible amorous relationship with literally a computer screen. Yeah. And when the boyfriend finally got out and they were together and they were doing the interview with him, and she said, well, who are you going to choose, your boyfriend or this AI thing that you've been talking to? And she goes, well, I hope I won't have to make that choice. I mean, obviously he's in the flesh and that's a good thing. But she said, I really do, miss my relationship I have with this computer. Yeah. And I thought, wow, we are strangely approaching a time when the distinctions between reality and fantasy are going to be incredibly difficult, especially for young people to discern.
Yeah,
we're there.
Yeah, and it used to be. It used to be the fantasy of something, right? So like pornography used to be the fantasy of a person on a page, right? But now it's the fantasy that I create.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not somebody else creating a fantasy and somebody else airbrushing a picture.
Right.
Right? Now it's the fantasy. I know, OnlyFriends, super popular, mm-hmm. right? So instead of looking at pornography, I now get to interact with a person and dictate what they do, and they do these things right based on what, and I get charged for all these things. Mm-hmm. I'm hearing about people spending tens of thousands of dollars, right, on creating this interaction in this relationship that in some ways, right, it's a real relationship because it's you interacting with somebody, right, and you dictating that, and that's what people. It's like, I feel like I have a real relationship, but it's not with a real person. Correct. Right, because a real person can reject me, and a real person has emotions and feelings that I got to put up with. But this, I can just disconnect and unplug and move on. And
it's commodified, all that. I mean, that's a commodity that you're experiencing. It's not a relationship.
Right.
I mean, it's like paying a prostitute.
But I get to control that.
Oh, yeah.
And there's and a lot of people feel like there's nothing negative that I get from that. Right. So here's the thing. In the midst of all that, the one person I really want to talk to, right, is that mom or dad who's got a young person, at school. They're hearing about these things, and they go, Ricky, that's terrible, right? That's awful. But here's the thing, like, my son's friend at school, right? I'm hearing that, they want to transition, or, they're coming out as gay, or, right? So everybody has somebody that they're hearing about,
Sure.
right? What do we say to that mom or that dad to help them better understand, okay, what do I do, Ricky, for my own kids?
Right.
And then what do I do when I talk to my friends? Because I know a lot of people, right, when they talk to their friends, it's like, listen, my son or daughter, they're making these decisions. My job is just to, is to love and accept them, right? And you're kind of looking at it from a biblical standpoint, saying it's not right.
Right.
It's not good for them. And eventually, right, when they run into that wall,
right,
you're going to have to pick up the pieces. So
yeah.
Talk to that parent.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the parent has to do, provided that your kid has a friend and isn't the kid himself that's making the transition, but I think you need to talk to them just honestly about what is God's design for sexuality. And I think we go back to the beginning and we see God creating males and females, doing that with incredible intentionality, one created for the other, and how the purpose of the coupling that God puts together is a procreative purpose. He wants us to produce life, because in doing so, we image God in a way that no other creatures can. We bring forth life into the world, which is so beautiful. And so when you look at that and you begin to show that to a kid, to say, okay, well, how does someone who decides to be trans and loses their sexual ability, reproductive ability, how are they fulfilling that creative intent on the part of God? Well, they can't. Or to people who decide to be same-sex related and decide that they want to have a child. So the transgender person, can't reproduce in that way, just like a same-sex person can't reproduce. And so you start looking at that and you go, wait a minute, okay, well, that doesn't fit the intent of creation, And it's kind of like saying, I have a wheelbarrow outside and I can put things in it and I can carry it places. But if I'm taking a trip from Dallas to Fort Worth, I probably need to go in an automobile, not a wheelbarrow. Even though the wheelbarrow has the capacity to carry me, it's not really the best vehicle, and it wasn't created for that purpose.
But you just talked about the whole transhumanism movement, right? And I remember you sending me a picture years ago of a woman who had transitioned to
Yeah.
who was pregnant,
No.
right? By a
non-binary partner.
Like you remember all this.
Yeah.
Right?
Transgender man
by non-binary
gives birth to
partner,
non-binary partner's baby with a female sperm donor.
Isn't science going to give us the freedom to be whatever we want and still create life and still be the image bearers of God?
Well, it may. And I've read some articles about the fact that they're now producing external wombs, in Japan and in China. Where they're creating the symbiotic fluids and all that stuff.
Sounds like the Matrix.
It does sound like the Matrix. and they're taking these babies and putting them there and raising them there, and parents can go by and watch them develop, but they're not inside the mama, And
are they in a system where they're just little batteries for the
kind of, yeah. I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And so, but you look at all that, and then on the one hand, I think what's captivating to many people is the fact that they become empathetic toward those who can't have children and go, wouldn't this be a wonderful thing?
Yep.
Much like IVF or surrogacy or all that.
Yep.
And you look at that and you go, oh, well, gosh, this would be such a great opportunity. On the other hand, we don't really think about the ramifications and the results and consequences of those kinds of actions.
Right.
And what ends up happening once again is we commodify a human rather than prioritize the human and say what is actually best for the human.
Yeah, I remember when IVF and the whole idea of can we create children so we make sure that certain
genetic problems don't happen.
Genetic problems
Sure.
and things like that. Then it became, well, can I pick their eye color and can I pick their height and can I make, and all of a sudden it became,
we have designer babies.
Right. Yeah. It's like this started over here
Correct.
in a way that was like, I see the good, I see the positive, and then it quickly morphed into I see my benefits and I see what I want.
Correct. So I think that parent, getting back to the mom, she's going to need to communicate really effectively with that kid. And I think the most important thing in the midst of all this is the child has to understand that there are systems and processes and boundaries and realities that when we violate those realities, bad things happen.
Right.
And so it's not that humans can't. We have to remember we're created in the image of God, a little Lord and the angels, crowned with honor and glory and all that. So we can do a lot of things that manipulate our environment. We are in charge of this world. And so we get to do all kinds of things with it. But the reality is our ability to do it doesn't necessarily say it's right to do.
Amen.
And so we have to be super careful about the things that God has given us stewardship over. And the most important of that is our own bodies and human life. And so I think that mom's got to really help that person, that kid or child understand, okay, what is really happening here? And if we flip this and say, okay, rather than him deciding to become a girl when he's really been born a boy, what if he decides to become something else, transspecies-wise? If he decides to become a dragon or a elephant or a rhinoceros, is it okay for them to do? Well, no, Mom, that'd be ridiculous. Well, why is it ridiculous? What makes it? Well, you can't become a giraffe. I mean, he just can't. And I'm like, but he can become a woman if he's really born a male? Like, how does that happen? No, there could be someone that looks more like a woman than he did before, but he's not ever going to be able to do the things that women do, nor will he ever be able to think like a woman because the only brain he has is a masculine brain. Right. And he's only going to think thoughts as a man, not as a woman.
Yeah. So growing out his hair and putting on a dress makes him as much a woman as, right, putting on, lengthening your neck makes you a giraffe.
Correct.
Right?
It's not going to happen.
It's just, exactly.
It's not going to happen.
There's nothing, right? And that's where I kind of say this is what's become super frustrating for me, is when this moved into the athletic realm, and so many women who were athletes, and I'll just say, right, women have fought for equality on so many levels, especially when it deals with athletics, that when men transitioned and went into women's athletics, and so many women backed down and said, "Oh, well, there she is standing up on the podium. Right. Let's celebrate her."
That's a problem.
And I was like, "We're not
what happened? What happened to all the feminists when that happened?"
Yes,
I'm like, you talk about undoing any feminist progress that had been made.
Literally.
You just erased it completely.
Yeah, like 100 years of...
Oh, yeah, yeah. Women's equality.
Women's equality.
You just moved it out of the picture.
Moved out of
altogether.
the picture. And here's the thing. It seems like there's beginning to be a little bit more of a pushback on the gender identity concept. Right? Do you feel that?
No, I definitely feel that.
Okay.
I think that's definitely happened. And I think what happened was in the process of the LGBTQ plus movement, they way underestimated the impact of the T.
Yes.
And even within the LGB community, there is a huge conflict between the LGB folks and the T folks.
The T changes everything.
The T changes everything. Yep. And so especially for the Ls, the lesbians are furious with the Ts because typically they're first and second, stage feminist and they want equality and all that sort of thing. Well, suddenly you get a T coming in who is really a man who's now becoming Woman of the Year, and they're like, "Are you kidding me? Like this can't happen." But it's happening. And so there is a huge infighting going on that you don't hear about because when it comes to public things, they are incredible at walking in lockstep with each other. But that is happening. And I think, too, when you started dealing with children and started saying that children could transition at 4 and 5 and 6, or they would at least know who they are to be able to desire transition, and you had parents saying, well, yeah, my son's always been a little feminine, he's always been drawn toward girly things, so it must be that he is a girl, and we're going to affirm that and believe that, and we're going to let him transition, he's going to be able to dress up. I mean, what little kid doesn't want to dress up? Every little kid wants to dress up. And so especially when I dress up and everybody gives attention to me, of course I'll do it. It's a conditioned response at that point. And so all of a sudden this kid is caught in the middle of a world of confusion and parents who are affirming things that are untrue about the child when they're supposed to be the ones pointing to truth for the child because they have no boundaries. They have no understanding of what truth is. And instead, once again, I feel as though that's a desire on the part of the parents to accomplish something, not a part of the child wanting, because he doesn't know what he wants or she.
Right.
And so
when the 3-year-old,
the 3 or 5-year-old,
right,
or 8-year-old for that matter,
the parent is definitely steering,
absolutely,
right, and conditioning this child in a particular direction. And I think that, to me, that is so harmful and damaging. And that's where those are the conversations that's very difficult when you start talking about, well, that's my friend, right, and this is what they're doing to their son or daughter, and you're trying to, right, say, listen, here's how God designed male and female and all that, right? And they're like looking at you going, well, I want, to have freedom and, my kid to live their authentic life. And you're like, that all sounds great in theory, right, but in practice, right,
it's incredibly destructive.
It can be like
can be,
right. But I mean, the gender roles of, rough and tumble versus sensitive, because you talk about this all the time, which I love, right? But it doesn't mean that, my boy, right, has to play baseball or football.
Correct.
Okay, great. Yeah. But it also doesn't mean that I dress up my boy, right, in a pink tutu and say that he's a girl.
Correct.
There's a huge world in between those two realities.
Exactly. And that's what we try to communicate with folks, to help them understand, hey, let's expand the expressions of both femininity and masculinity, and realize that you can have a little sensitive boy who wants to draw or wants to, attracted to colorful things or beautiful things or whatever. That doesn't make him a girl. It just simply makes him an aesthetically aware little boy. And that's fantastic. Maybe he's going to be Michelangelo. Who knows? But let's affirm that and affirm him as a man in that reality. And that's where the crazy thing comes in. It's like, on the one hand, the LGBT community says, I hate labels, I don't want to stereotype, I don't want to do this, but at the same time, they use those very stereotypes to pigeonhole people and to say, well, if you feel this, then you must be this. Right. And I'm like, wait a minute, you can't have both of those. Yeah. Those two arguments don't work simultaneously.
Yeah, and that's where we as the Christian community, right, need to go back to that idea. This is how God's designed. Yeah. The other things, the cultural labels that we put on people, right? Those are cultural labels that we put on people, right? And we need to say, this is what God has said, right? There's male and there's female. The gender and sexuality, which I love, just how I wish we did a better job of teaching the importance of gender and sexuality from a younger age.
Absolutely.
Right? The importance of what marriage looks like from a younger age. And I just remember, right, at my age, right, when we heard things about gender and sexuality, it was always in a negative frame. It was what we don't do, right? It was seen as and it's just like, this is God's design.
Right.
And it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it's complex.
Yeah, super complex.
Try not to make this thing, so simple and dumbed down.
Right.
This is profound.
Yeah.
And so, just for young people to grasp, right, that God's beauty is in this, but it also is something that's very powerful. And so if you're going to mess up on something, and I love how you started, and I know we kind of laughed at it, but I love how you started.
No, you laughed at it. I didn't.
Your story has a villain, right?
Yeah.
Great book out there by JP. And it is, right? Yeah. If I were the enemy, working against humanity, working against God's, image bearers.
Right.
Right, I would attack gender and sexuality. I'd attack the family. I'd make sure, especially, that the male was removed from the leadership of the home to provide that structure and that wisdom and that strength, where he wouldn't be able to say to his son or his daughter, right, this is who God created you to be, and this is what I see in you, and this is what I affirm.
And the risk-taking reality that men are known for, where moms create that sense of nurture and safety, dad are like, no, let's fight this a little bit, And when you don't have that, then everybody's there to just make everybody happy, because we just want everybody to be happy. And that's not good. I mean, I think parents, as I've been talking more, all these years, I keep going back to these preschool parents, and I keep saying to them, please, 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 if there's one thing you do well, please sexually disciple your child.
Yeah.
And Julie Slattery has a lot of information about that kind of thing, and she wrote a book about it. And it's just super important that we as parents, from the time our child literally is born, we're affirming who they have been created to be. We're affirming the fact that it's good to be a male, it's good to be a female, and here are the beautiful things about that. Yeah. And here are the limits to that.
Okay, okay, I'm glad you said that. Because the limits part, that's
real.
It's real, but it's part of God's design because you're not created to do everything.
No,
right? Here's the thing: you and I were both created to be men.
Yeah,
there are limits to that.
Yep.
That perfectly fine.
Yep.
Right. I will never grow a human being in my body.
Never.
Which, by the way, is a miraculous thing.
Yeah, it's
right?
unbelievable.
It's crazy, right? My wife has done it 4 times.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre to think, right, that she created a little human being in her body, and she got to do that. I'll never get to do that.
No.
Why can't I do that, Ricky? Well, right. It's just different.
Right.
You have different gifts, different abilities, and those go beyond your gender and sexuality, right?
Yep.
Your gifts, your abilities, your talents, right? The way that God has wired you to be.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. He's wired you to be a particular way and created you for a particular purpose. And
Absolutely.
he knows what that purpose is. And when you get to know the creator and the designer and what the purpose is, then you don't see him as limits. You see him as guidestones and directions and a path for you to go, right? I always think of my favorite place to go to is Buc-ee's, right? I love Buc-ee's. And there's a billboard, right? You're driving down 35 and there's a billboard for Buc-ee's. And my favorite thing is Buc-ee's always tells you how far away the next Buc-ee's is,
exactly.
right? Buc-ee's 52 miles. And the next one is Buc-ee's 51 miles. The next one is Buc-ee's 50 miles. But my favorite one is when you leave Buc-ee's, right? The next sign you'll see is Buc-ee's 152 miles. Right?
That's right.
Because they don't want you to miss it.
That's right.
Right? And the cool thing is, and I think we haven't really taught our kids this, but our gender and sexuality actually are a billboard for our bodies literally point to God.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
There's something, and Paul says there's something fabulously unique about the male and the female, the way the male is the initiator and the female is the receiver, the creation of the new life when those two come together.
Yeah.
Right? That is a picture and a mirror of what God does with the church as he creates new life in us. And I'm just like, that's why it's so profound.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
that's Christ in the church. Ephesians 5, that's what it says.
Thing.
Yeah. And so if we allow the devil to destroy that reality, which is what's happening,
exactly,
then I've always said to folks, well, then how will we see God in the world?
Yeah.
Now, granted, we'll see him in creation if we're looking carefully because it's there, but we won't see him in the most obvious image-bearing reality that he created, which is humans. And I think we're fast approaching a time when people are looking and trying to say, what is going on? I think it's what we're seeing right now in some of this alpha generation, some of the Z generation, where they're looking and going, wait a minute, this isn't really working. People are not treating each other right, and something is wrong. And they inherently feel that discord that's in their hearts and lives, and they see the tensions that are there, and they're looking for something that is truthful and that makes sense. And more importantly, not only makes sense about what they feel, but it makes sense in the context of the world. Yeah. Because the problem with LGBTQ stuff is when you just talk about it for half a minute, you realize that there's so many incongruencies in it and inconsistencies in it and illogical arguments and circular craziness that you're like, wait a minute, none of this really fits. Like A plus B doesn't equal C here in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And it doesn't take very long to get there.
No. In like 2.5, we can get there.
Wait a second.
Yeah, this is crazy. And so looking at all that, we've got to stop and say, okay, wait a minute, how do we make sense of our world? And the only way we make sense of the world, the reason I'm a Christian is because I look at the Bible and I think this makes sense of the world. It really makes sense. At every level of the world, it makes sense. Yep. And so it explains the difficulties, it explains the good stuff, it explains the horrific stuff, and it gives a hope in the midst of all of it that we can be redeemed and we can be transformed. And that's what I love about what I do, as hard as it is sometimes, and as many folks hate the fact that I do what I do. I love to see when people get it and the light bulb comes on, and all of a sudden these folks who come in that maybe thought they were in the wrong body or believed that their only hope was to for companionship and community was to find another person of the same sex and have that kind of relationship, suddenly realize, wait a minute, that's not really what I'm made for. And then they enter into that new reality, embrace it, and then end up being folks who are now, pastors of churches with families or serving in the church somewhere. And I've been doing it long enough to see the end results of those things and to know that can happen. Yep. And so when that transformation takes place, to me, it negates the very premise upon which the LGBT community is operating, which says this is who we are and we can't help but be what we are, and it cannot change. And I'm like, the fact that any one person changes would negate that entire argument. And we've got thousands and thousands and thousands.
Yeah, I always say you provide clarity in the midst of confusion and hope in the midst of hurt.
Yeah.
And that's such a beautiful thing that you do. One other thing I need you to provide is a little bit of direction, because if I'm thinking about these things, and we mentioned Carl Trueman's book, right? The Rise and Triumph. It's 500 pages, whatever it is. He wrote a shorter one called Strange New World, which I'd rather read the longer one because the longer one gives you more.
Yeah, but that's you, Dan.
Yeah, I know. But what else? Who else should I be reading? Who else? If I'm a parent and I want to know more about this, I don't want to talk about, because you and I have talked about people to stay away from. Let's not do that.
Okay. All right.
Let's just give me a couple different people that you say they're out there and what they're writing on this issue of gender and sexuality is biblically true and good for me to read.
Yeah. There's several. Anything by Joe Dallas is wonderful. He's been around for a long time. He comes through this stuff himself, was a gay activist at one point. He's a granddad now and doing great stuff. Continues to put out really excellent biblical, solid, stuff. Nancy Pearcey is another one that I love. Does a great job. Theologically, Rob Gagnon does an incredible job.
Her Toxic Masculinity book was fantastic, which is as long as
and Love Thy Body is
Love Thy
amazing.
Body was awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing,
fantastic.
Yeah, and the other place I would say.
Wait, who was the other one? The last one you said?
Gagnon, Robert Gagnon.
Okay.
He's theologian. If you're interested in the theology of why this is what it is, and what does the church believe about it, what does the church historically believed about it, what does the Jewish culture believe about it, all that stuff. He's got incredible stuff on that.
Good.
And I would encourage you, we've got a lot more. We actually have a thing we started a couple of years ago called the Institute of Biblical Sexuality. And if you go to biblicalsexuality.net, I had to think about that real hard.
Put it in the show notes.
Yeah, biblicalsexuality.net. We actually have a whole
resource.
Listing of resources that we vetted and looked at and said, we believe in this. We know where these folks are coming from. We don't obviously agree with every single word they write, but by and large, these are really solid kinds of resources.
But I would just say, be careful.
Oh, always. Very much.
Be very careful, because there's some
real topic. It's a real popular topic right now.
I think there are some wonderful brothers and sisters in Christ who, when it comes to gender and sexuality, they move towards affirming that isn't really helpful.
Correct.
That
Correct.
You and I, you've steered me away from some people that you've said, hey, Dan,
avoid this.
Avoid this. Be careful. And I just, whatever their heart's desire is, I know that they love people and they want to help people.
Sure.
But I want to stay true to God's word and the way that he has designed things, even if it means that it's going to be a difficult conversation and not the warm embrace that I want to give them. Right? Because I think we have to say, this is how God has designed things, and it's better than us just saying, okay, let's accept you the way that you want to be, as opposed to let's help you become the way that God has designed for you to be.
Yeah, and I think what you said there is so important about the idea that we want to love people well, and I always have to do this when I say that, because I was like, I need to define what love is.
That's right.
And love, biblically, is I have to say things to you that might not always be what you want me to say, but because I love you and I care about you and I want you to be closer to Jesus, I need to say whatever that is that brings you closer to Jesus. And it may not agree with what you're doing. And I want people to do that for me. If I'm doing something that isn't positive, isn't good, isn't putting people closer to Jesus, if I'm acting in a way that isn't drawing folks to Christ, I want somebody to say, hey, man, the way you said that was not good, and you need to know that. Yeah. And so we need to be doing that with people. And that's not going to be a fun experience always. But Jesus said, that he loves us as a friend, and as a friend, he was willing to lay down his life in order that we would be redeemed. And so we need to be willing to do that same kind of thing. Yeah, we might we may lose a friend, but it would be better for the wounds of a friend to bring us closer to Jesus than for us to ignore it and then look back at it and say, well, they're in a whole different place now, and I wish I'd have said that.
Can I tell you, it's the number one complaint of young people who have gone through these transitions. Right? They've gone through these transitions, they've had these surgeries, and now 3 or 4 years later, they're saying, where was the person who said, hey, could we just kind of hit the pause button on this? Could we think through this? Everybody affirmed, and everybody moved them, and everybody pushed them on. And they ended up making dramatic,
life-altering decisions.
Life-altering, right? Irreversible. Irreversible, right? And it's, young women who will never have children. Right, and it's so damaging, and but I love when you feel that that pull, that compulsion, when they just say, where was that person? Right, and it's like they wouldn't have run up and embraced you and said, thanks for speaking the truth to me. Right? They would have pushed back, but they didn't have anybody push back. And I think that's our call as Christians. Right, it doesn't mean it's going to be accepted. It's got to mean it's going to be welcomed.
And we certainly need to do
speak the
it
truth.
kindly
Sure.
and winsomely and with compassion
Yep.
and all those things.
But you know what? A great lesson I learned when I was young, my parents used to tell me, the message doesn't always come packaged in the way that you want.
Yeah.
But if the message is true, don't worry about the messenger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was the thing, right? Jesus as a messenger
Yeah.
of the gospel. A lot of people looked at the messenger and said,
Yeah.
hey, does anything good come out of Nazareth?
Right.
And they missed the message
That's right.
because of the messenger.
Yeah.
And it's like God's love for you, we have to be the carriers of that message. And whether we're loved and embraced and accepted in this particular culture or by our friends and neighbors or not, we have to speak truth. Because if we don't, we're affirming people hurting themselves, damaging
Absolutely.
themselves, jumping into, right, the greatest medical malpractice perpetrated on humanity in the history of the world.
That's
and
what
we
they
don't,
say.
And we don't want to be a part of that.
That's right.
So, Ricky, thank you for the work that you do, and thanks for the time just to be able to give some clarity in the midst of confusion and some hope in the midst of a lot of hurt.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Journey. We hope this podcast provides information to help you raise your children, and it would help us tremendously if you would like, subscribe, share, and review this content on your favorite podcast platform. It is our pleasure to provide this information to our community, and we look forward to our next time together on The Journey.